Hello and welcome to Narrowcast Boxing. It's March 8th, 2019. Let's discuss the fights, but first let me say that I'm a bit late with the podcast this week, so I'm going to quickly run through what happened last week and then move on to what's going on this weekend. Also, if you made it to this point in the podcast, let me say that you made it further than the one person who listened to my podcast from last week, so thank you for that. As for the fights from last weekend, there were two that I was interested in and suggested, and they were featured on the same card. They were Luis Ortiz versus Christian Hammer and Lara versus Brian Castano. First, let me start off with Luis Ortiz and Christian Hammer. I expected Ortiz to win, and he did. He basically outclassed Hammer throughout the fight, although Hammer did have some success. I scored the fight 98 to 92. The judges had it 100 to 90, and two of them had it 99 to 91. Overall, I thought Ortiz looked all right. He did lose a couple of rounds on my card and did meet a fair amount of resistance from Hammer. It looked like Ortiz's glove touched the canvas in round two, but a replay showed that it was from a headbutt, so I can't really fault Ortiz too badly for going down. It wasn't called a knockdown anyways, but Ortiz definitely showed his class and technical ability throughout the fight, but at times he didn't really seem to throw enough punches. He also struggled to cut off the ring, which is something that's been an issue with him in the past. I think Ortiz is really a natural counter puncher. He would rather not have to hunt for his opponent. While I thought Ortiz was dominant in the fight for the most part, I couldn't help but think that his age really started catching up to him. He's going to be 40 at the end of this month, I believe, and he did slow down in the middle rounds and got hit with a number of clean punches. His skill certainly carried him through the fight, and the fight eventually did fall into a predictable pattern, with Ortiz using his jab, his footwork, combinations, and pot shots. Ortiz's best round seemed to be the last one, which was surprising. He did seem to go for the stoppage. But moving forward, I think that there are going to be heavyweights who will come out of the woodwork based on this performance and try and secure a fight with Ortiz. Ortiz is, in my eyes, the best heavyweight from a technical standpoint, but his age and stamina definitely showed in this fight, and I could see him getting beaten by Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, and maybe even Dillian White at this point. The second fight, which I was interested in, was the fight between Lara and Brian Castano. I scored the fight 116-113 for Castano. Usually I tend to go for the boxers rather than the pressure fighters in these types of matchups, but I didn't in this case. The judges had it a split draw with one of the judges having it 115-113 for Lara, the other judge had it 115-113 for Castano, and the third judge having it 114-114. I thought this was a very fair decision, and I have no issues with it at all. I didn't think either fighter really deserved a loss on the record based on this performance. I thought they both did what they intended to do. I did score the fight for Castano, but I am happy with the results. So this was a competitive fight with a lot of back and forth rounds, and really not much separated any of the rounds. Lara pretty much looked to box from range, while Castano tried to get in close and throw combinations. There's really not much more to say about this one. I knew almost nothing about Castano going in, but I heard that he was a good fighter, and that certainly was the case. Both guys are clearly very good and certainly top fighters at 154 pounds, and we'll just have to see what happens with them moving forward. As for the fights this weekend, there's a bunch of them to choose from. I'll just run through some fights and fighters of note before I get to the fights which I'm actually interested in. So tonight, this is actually recorded on Friday. Tonight there's a card in the UK which features two prospects, one a heavyweight Daniel Dubois, the other a light heavyweight Anthony Yarde. I expect them to come through these fights with either wide decision wins or stoppages. Their opponents are pretty nondescript, and after all, these two are prospects, so they just pretty much need rounds and experience at this point. Also tomorrow, Maurice Hooker will be facing Michael Lespierre for a super lightweight championship, which should be a good fight, although I'm not too familiar with either fighter. I may catch this fight before the main event. The main event, speaking of, is one of the two best fights from this weekend, in my opinion, and one that I would suggest. This one being Dmitry Bivol taking on Joe Smith Jr. This will be for a light heavyweight championship. I expect Bivol to win this fight, possibly by stoppage. Bivol is very technically sound. He's not really the hardest puncher in the division, but he is a very solid fighter, and I expect him to outclass Joe Smith Jr., who seems to me to be pretty rudimentary, although he does carry power. But either a wide decision win or, as I said, a possible stoppage is what I'm looking for from Bivol. The second fight, which I would suggest from this weekend, is Shawn Porter versus Yordenis Ugas. This will be for a welterweight championship. I'm predicting Porter to get the victory here, although I think he'll have to work hard for it. Ugas is a good fighter, but I don't think he'll be able to handle Porter's pressure and physicality. Ugas, from what I've seen of him, likes to box, and I don't think he really has the power to stop Porter's offense. This should be an interesting style matchup, regardless, and I'm expecting a competitive and entertaining fight. Hopefully it doesn't get too ugly, as Shawn Porter fights sometimes happen to be. But anyways, that's it for this week. Like, comment, subscribe, and enjoy the fights, and I'll talk to you next week.